I am Daniel Harris, 72 years old, and the words my own son spoke to me in the workshop I built with my bare hands still echo in my mind, a cold, sharp sound against the familiar hum of the saws. "Dad," he said, avoiding my eyes, his posture as stiff as the new Italian suit he was wearing, "we appreciate everything you've done, but your services are no longer required here." My services. As if I were a plumber he'd called in for a leaky faucet, and not the man who had breathed life into every plank and beam of this place for over 40 years. The business wasn't just a building. It was my heart, my history, and I had just handed it to the one person I thought would protect it, my only son. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. It all started on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air smells of wood smoke and decaying leaves, a smell that always made me feel alive. For 42 years, that smell had been my alarm clock. I built Harris's Son Carpentry from the ground up, starting in the 1980s with nothing but a set of second-hand tools, a 20-year-old pickup truck, and a dream my late wife Martha believed in more than IBS did. She'd handle the books from our small kitchen table while I worked out of the garage, my hands raw and blistered, turning rough timber into things of beauty and function. We built our lives together, one perfectly joined corner at a time. The first piece of furniture I ever sold was a rocking chair for old Mrs. Gable down the street for her first grandchild. She paid me $50 and a homemade apple pie, and I felt like the richest man in the world. Over the decades, the garage became a proper workshop, then a larger building with a small showroom. Harris Son was a name people in our town trusted. They knew if they got a cabinet, a table, or a custom-built bookshelf from me, it was made to last a lifetime. It was built with honesty, with wood that had been chosen by hand, and with a respect for the craft that felt increasingly rare in a world of flat-pack furniture and disposable goods. My son Mark grew up in that workshop. The scent of sawdust was his first memory. I can still see him as a little boy, maybe 6 or 7, standing on a crate so he could reach the workbench, his small hands trying to guide a piece of sandpaper over a block of pine. I taught him everything I knew, or so I thought. I taught him how to read the grain of a piece of oak, how to listen to the sound of a sharp plane, how to feel the balance of a well-made hammer. I thought he loved it. I thought he understood that what we were doing wasn't just a job, it was a legacy. But time is a cruel and relentless carpenter. It wears you down, sanding away your strength. A few years ago, the dull ache in my lower back became a constant, searing pain. A slip disc, the doctor said, a parting gift from a lifetime of lifting heavy timber. Some days, just bending over to pick up a fallen chisel felt like a monumental effort. I was slowing down, and the business was suffering for it. Orders were taking longer, and I couldn't put in the 16-hour days I used to. The thought of selling was unbearable. Selling Harris Son would be like selling a part of my soul, a piece of my history with Martha. That's when Mark stepped in. He was 38, with a business degree he'd earned from the state university and a few years under his belt working a corporate job in the city. He'd moved back to our town with his wife Jessica and their 2 young kids a year prior, saying he was tired of the rat race. He started helping me out at the shop, mostly with the accounts and scheduling, things I'd always found tedious. He was sharp, I couldn't deny that. He created a website, streamlined the invoicing, and talked about things like brand identity and market expansion. It was a different language, but I was proud of him. He was ambitious. One evening, after a particularly bad day where my back had seized up completely, I sat him down in my old office, the one with the worn leather chair and the walls covered in framed photos of our best work. "Mark," I started, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. "I can't do this anymore. Not the way it needs to be done. The business is yours, if you want it." A slow smile spread across his face. It was a look of pure triumph. "Of course I want it, Dad. It's my birthright. Don't you worry about a thing. I'll make you proud. I'm going to take this business into the 21st century." We had a lawyer draw up the papers. I signed everything over to him for a symbolic $1. I didn't want his money. I wanted him to have the foundation I'd built, to carry on the family name with pride. I insisted on only one condition: that I could still come in a few days a week. I didn't want a salary. I just wanted to keep my hands busy, to mentor the younger craftsmen, to feel the familiar comfort of the workshop. It was my home, after all. "Of course, Dad," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. "This will always be your place." For the first month, it was fine. I'd come in around 10, after my back had a chance to loosen up. I'd sweep the floors, sharpen the tools, and offer advice when I saw one of the younger guys struggling with a difficult joint. But I started to notice changes. Small at first, then more profound. The old, sturdy workbenches I'd built myself were replaced with sleek, metal-topped stations. The warm, incandescent bulbs were swapped for harsh, sterile LED strips that made the workshop feel like a laboratory. Mark spent a fortune on a new computerized cutting machine, a CNC router that could carve intricate designs with robotic precision. It was efficient, I'll give him that, but it had no soul. The work it produced was perfect, too perfect. It lacked the subtle, human imperfections that made a piece of handcrafted furniture unique. He also fired Frank, my oldest friend, and the first employee I ever hired. Mark said he was too slow and not adapting to the new workflow. Frank was 70, a year younger than me. He was replaced by a kid half his age who knew how to operate the new computer, but didn't know the difference between cherry and maple by smell alone. The day Frank left, he shook my hand, his own calloused palm feeling rough against mine. "It's not your fault, Danny," he'd said, but his eyes told a different story. He looked betrayed, and I felt a hot shame rise in my chest. This was happening on my watch, in my shop. I tried to talk to Mark about it one afternoon. I found him in my old office, which he had completely renovated. The worn leather chair was gone, replaced by a black ergonomic monstrosity. The walls were painted a stark, clinical gray, and my old photos were replaced with framed motivational posters with phrases like "innovate" or "evaporate." "Mark, son," about Frank, I began, leaning against the burette doorframe. He didn't look up from his laptop. "Dad, it was a business decision. Frank's productivity was down 30% compared to the new hires. We can't afford that kind of inefficiency if we're going to scale up." "Scale up? What are you talking about? We're a local business. We have more work than we can handle because people trust us. Frank is a part of that trust." He finally looked at me, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "That's the old way of thinking, Dad. Local is small. I'm talking to developers. Big contracts. We're bidding on the cabinetry for that new 200-unit condo development over on the east side. That's the future, not whittling away on one-off rocking chairs for little old ladies." The casual dismissal in his tone stung more than I let on. That rocking chair wasn't just a one-off. It was the cornerstone of our reputation. Each piece we made was a promise to our neighbors. But I held my tongue. This was his business now. I had to let him make his own decisions, his own mistakes. The tension grew thicker each day I came into the shop. The younger workers, the ones Mark had hired, looked at me like I was a ghost, a relic from a bygone era. They listened politely when I offered a suggestion, then immediately looked to Mark for his approval. I felt like a guest in my own home. My advice on wood selection was ignored in favor of whatever supplier offered the best bulk discount. My insistence on using traditional joinery was dismissed as time-consuming when screws and glue were faster. The soul of the place was being systematically stripped away, replaced by a cold, hard focus on profit margins and efficiency metrics. The beautiful, creative chaos of my workshop was being replaced by a sterile assembly line. The breaking point came about 3 months after I'd handed him the keys. I came in one morning to find a new glossy sign above the door. It no longer said Harris's Son Carpentry. It just said Harris Modern Design. The sum had been removed. My legacy, my partnership with Martha, erased with a piece of plastic and some chrome lettering. I walked into the workshop, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I found Mark standing with a client, a slick-looking developer in a suit. Mark was showing him a sample cabinet door, a piece of particle board covered in a thin, photorealistic wood veneer. It was garbage. It would peel and chip within a year. The core is a high-density composite, Mark was explaining, using the kind of buzzwords that sound impressive but mean nothing. It's more stable than solid wood and environmentally friendly. I couldn't help myself. I stepped forward and rapped my knuckles on the sample. It made a hollow, dead sound. "It's sawdust and glue, son," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's not wood. It won't last." The developer raised an eyebrow. Mark's face turned a shade of crimson. He forced a tight smile and quickly led the developer away, muttering something about an old-timer who's resistant to change. After the man left, Mark marched back to me, his face a mask of fury. "What do you think you were doing?" he hissed, keeping his voice low so the employees couldn't hear. "You almost cost me a $1.2 million contract. You embarrassed me." "I was telling the truth," I said, my own anger rising. "We built this business on truth, on quality. That thing you were showing him, that's a lie. It's not what a Harris-built cabinet is." "There is no we anymore, Dad," he shot back, his voice cracking with a strange mix of rage and frustration. "It's my business, and I can't have you wandering around here contradicting me in front of clients, telling the staff to do things the old way. It's confusing, it's inefficient, it's holding me back." I stared at him, my own son, and I barely recognized the man in front of me. The boy who had looked at me with such adoration, who had wanted to be just like me, was gone. In his place was a stranger wearing a suit and a face full of ambition so corrosive it had eaten away his own roots. "What are you saying, Mark?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He took a deep breath and finally met my gaze. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth they once held. "I'm saying this isn't working. I think it's best if you don't come in anymore." And then came the words that shattered the last piece of my heart. "Dad, we appreciate everything you've done, but your services are no longer required here." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just stood there for a moment, the hum of the CNC machine in the background sounding like a death rattle for everything I had built. I looked past him, at the workshop, my workshop, now so alien and unfamiliar. I nodded slowly, a profound and hollow sadness washing over me. I turned and walked out, past the new sign, past the computerized equipment, and I didn't look back. I left my keys on the reception desk on the way out. After all, it wasn't my place anymore. The days that followed were the longest of my life. I'd wake up at my usual 6 a.m., my body still tuned to the rhythm of a working man, but there was nowhere for me to go. The silence in my small house, once a peaceful refuge after a long day's work, was now a suffocating presence. I'd wander from room to room, my hands feeling useless and empty. My tools, the ones I had brought home, sat in my garage, collecting a fine layer of dust. They were extensions of my own hands, and without them, I felt like a part of me had been amputated. Everywhere I looked, there were memories of Martha. I saw her in the kitchen, humming as she did the books. I saw her in the garden, tending to her roses. And I felt her absence most acutely in my idleness. She had always been my biggest supporter, the one who believed in me when I doubted myself. "Your hands can make magic, Daniel," she used to say. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." What would she think of me now? A 72-year-old man, put out to pasture by his own son. I drove by the old workshop once. I couldn't help it. I parked across the street and just watched. The parking lot was filled with new vans, all emblazoned with the sleek Harris Modern Design logo. I saw workers in matching uniforms moving quickly, loading flat-packed pieces of veneer-covered particle board onto a truck. There was no artistry, no care, just a relentless, joyless efficiency. I saw Mark come out, yelling into his phone, his face creased with stress. He didn't look happy or proud. He just looked busy. I drove away with a hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't just my business he had taken. It was our shared history. My despair festered for weeks. I stopped answering the phone. I let the newspapers pile up on the porch. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door. I ignored it, but the knocking was persistent. Finally, annoyed, I opened it to find Mrs. Gable standing there, the same woman who had bought my first rocking chair all those years ago. She must have been in her 90s now, but her eyes were still as sharp as a tack. "Daniel Harris, I've been trying to call you," she said, her voice a little frail but firm. "I went by the shop. It's all so different. They told me you'd retired." "Something like that," I mumbled, not meeting her gaze. "Well, I don't believe it for a second," she said, peering past me into the house. "I have a bit of a problem. My mother's old hope chest, the latch is broken. It's very precious to me. The young man at your old place, he looked at it like it was a piece of junk, told me they don't do repair work, and tried to sell me a new laminated storage box." She shuddered. "Daniel, nobody else in this town has your hands. Could you possibly take a look at it for me?" Her words, her simple faith in my skill, were like a splash of cold water to the face. She didn't see a useless old man. She saw a craftsman. She saw the Daniel Harris who had built her daughter's rocking chair 40 years ago. "Of course, Mrs. Gable," I said, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of my old self. "Bring it over. I'll fix it in my garage." When she brought the chest, my hands trembled slightly as I ran them over the aged walnut. The wood was beautiful, the dovetail joints still perfect after a century. The latch was intricate brasswork. It was a simple fix, but it required patience and a delicate touch. As I worked on it in my dusty garage, surrounded by my old, familiar tools, something inside me started to stir. The smell of the wood oil, the feel of the brass in my hands, the quiet focus of the work, it was all a balm to my wounded spirit. When I returned the chest to her a few days later, the latch gleaming and working perfectly, she tried to press a $50 bill into my hand. I refused. "No, no," I said. "It was my pleasure." She looked at me with those wise, knowing eyes. "Nonsense, Daniel. A man's work is worth something, and your work is worth more than most." She tucked the money into my shirt pocket. "You know, there are a lot of people in this town who miss the way things used to be. They miss the quality. They miss you." Her words planted a seed. I started thinking. Mark had my workshop, my employees, my reputation, but he didn't have my hands. He didn't have my knowledge. And he had abandoned the very customers who had built the business in the first place. People like Mrs. Gable. The idea was small at first, a defiant spark in the darkness. What if I didn't have to be retired? What if I didn't need a big workshop and a fancy logo? My garage was cramped, but it was functional. I had my tools. I had my skills. And I had a name that, for some people at least, still meant something. I went down to the town hall and asked about permits. There was an old, unused produce stall at the edge of town, right by the main road where the weekend farmers market was held. It was little more than a wooden shack with a corrugated tin roof, but the rent was next to nothing. I used the $50 from Mrs. Gable as my first month's payment. The next 2 weeks, I was a man with a purpose again. I cleaned out the stall, patched the roof, and gave it a fresh coat of paint. I built a sturdy workbench from reclaimed barnwood and a few simple shelves to display my work. I didn't have a fancy sign made. I just took a piece of beautiful wide-grained pine and hand-carved the words "Daniel's Woodcraft" into it. Below that, I added a small line, "Old-fashioned quality, built to last." I didn't have much to sell at first. I made a few simple things I could craft with the lumber I had on hand. A set of hand-carved kitchen utensils, some sturdy children's stools, a few elegant birdhouses. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The first Saturday I opened, I sat on a stool behind my bench, a thermos of coffee beside me, feeling a nervous knot in my stomach. Cars sped by on the main road, their drivers barely glancing over. For hours, I had no customers. I started to think I'd made a terrible mistake, that I was just a foolish old man clinging to the past. Just as I was about to pack up, a familiar car pulled over. It was Mrs. Gable. She got out, followed by two of her friends. "Daniel, it's wonderful," she declared, her eyes taking in my humble setup. She picked up a cherry wood spatula, admiring the smooth finish. "I told you people missed you." She bought the spatula, and her friends bought a birdhouse and a small cutting board. They promised to tell everyone they knew, and they did. Word of mouth is a powerful thing in a small town. The next weekend, a few more people stopped by. A young woman, Sarah, whose wedding I had built a custom arbor for 10 years earlier, came with a special request. Her husband, a soldier, was on a short leave before his second tour overseas. He wanted a shadow box to display his grandfather's medals, a flag, and a few old photographs. He wanted it made of walnut, from an old tree that had fallen on their property. "We went to Harris Modern Design first," Sarah said, her voice soft. "The man there said they could make a standard display case, but they wouldn't use our wood. Too much trouble, he said. Said it wasn't dimensionally stable. My husband was so disappointed. Bring me the wood," I told them. "I'll make you a box that will honor those medals." Working on that shadow box felt like a sacred duty. The walnut was old and full of character. I spent a week carefully milling it, joining it with dovetail joints, and finishing it with a hand-rubbed oil finish that brought out its deep, rich color. When the young soldier came to pick it up, his eyes welled with tears. He gripped my hand firmly. "Thank you, sir," he said. This means everything." That's when I knew I was on the right path. My little stall wasn't just a business, it was a service. I was mending more than just broken furniture. I was helping people preserve their memories, honor their families, and create new heirlooms. I repaired rocking chairs, glued together the shattered pieces of treasured ceramic bowls into beautiful kintsugi-style wooden trays, and turned a woman's old, memory-laden dining table into a hopeful garden bench for her new life after a painful divorce. Each project was a story, a human connection. One Saturday, a young man, couldn't have been more than 17, hung around my stall for the better part of an hour, watching me work. He had bright, curious eyes and restless hands. Finally, he got up the courage to speak. "My name's Leo," he said. "I love what you do. I've been trying to learn from YouTube videos, but it's not the same." I saw a spark in him that reminded me of a young Mark, before the ambition had soured him. "Want to learn for real?" I asked. I started him off sweeping the floors, just like I had with Mark. But soon, I was teaching him how to sharpen a chisel, how to read the grain, how to cut a mortise and tenon joint by hand. He was a natural, soaking up the knowledge like a dry sponge. Having him around, eager and respectful, was a quiet joy. He even set up a simple social media page for me, posting photos of my work. "It's not about selling, Mr. Harris," he explained. "It's about sharing the stories." And people responded to that. The page grew, and I started getting inquiries from the next county over. Meanwhile, the whispers about Mark grew louder. I was at the local diner one morning when I overheard two painters I knew talking in the next booth. "Harris Modern Design owes my cousin's company over $20,000, one said. "The kid's running it into the ground. Bounced a check last week." My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Another time, I saw Dave, a carpenter who'd worked for me for 15 years before Mark let him go, working a landscaping job. He looked tired. I pulled over and offered him a job helping me out at the stall when I got busy. He accepted immediately. "It was a mess over there, Daniel," Dave told me one afternoon as we were loading a finished bookshelf into a customer's truck. Mark was obsessed with the condo job. He put all his resources into it, took out huge loans. When it went south, he had nothing to fall back on. He started cutting corners everywhere. The morale was terrible. He was shouting at everyone, stressed out of his mind. It wasn't the same place you built, not even close. I took no pleasure in it. He was still my son, but I knew this was the inevitable result of his choices. He had traded a foundation of solid oak for one of particle board, and now the whole structure was starting to crumble. He had forgotten the most important lesson I ever tried to teach him. A lesson that wasn't about joinery or wood finishing, but about integrity. Respect, like a sturdy piece of furniture, must be built carefully and honestly. It can't be inherited, and it certainly can't be faked with a thin layer of veneer. The definitive moment came when Mr. Henderson, the head of the town's historical society, stopped by my stall. He was a stern, discerning man for whom I had done a lot of restoration work over the years, including the intricate paneling in the old town hall. "Daniel," he said, getting straight to the point, "we have a major project. The old library is being converted into a museum. All the original oak shelving and reading tables need to be restored. It's delicate work. It requires a master's touch." My heart gave a little leap. It was exactly the kind of work I loved. "That sounds like a wonderful project, Robert," I said. He hesitated for a moment. "As a matter of procedure, the board required us to get 3 quotes. We approached your son's company first, given the Harris name." He sighed and shook his head. "Your son, Mark. He came in with a PowerPoint presentation, talked about synergy and logistics. He didn't even look at the actual woodwork. He just scanned it with a Balin tablet and said his team could replace it all with historically accurate replicas for a fraction of the cost of restoration. His quote was astronomical, and his attitude, well, it was off-putting." End quote. I just nodded, letting him speak. "He doesn't get it, Daniel," Mr. Henderson continued, his frustration evident. "The value is in the original wood, in the history. The nicks and scratches on those tables were made by generations of this town's children. You don't replace that. You honor it. You preserve it. You preserve it." He paused, his gaze meeting mine. "So, the board asked me to come here. We know you're working on a smaller scale now, but would you be interested in overseeing the project? You could use the library's basement as your workshop, and we can hire assistants to work under your direction. We want you, Daniel. Your hands, your expertise. Nobody else." It was the ultimate validation. It wasn't about money or the size of the contract. It was about respect for the craft. It was the historical society, the custodians of our town's legacy, choosing the old way, the right way, choosing me. "Robert," I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like a very long time. "I would be honored." The library project became my masterpiece. For 6 months, I was back in my element, surrounded by the ghosts of history, breathing new life into wood that had stood for over a century. The work was demanding on my old back, but it was a good pain. It was the pain of purpose. The news of the project spread through town, and my little stall became even more popular. Leo, my apprentice, was now a fixture, his skills growing by the day. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, as I was putting the finishing touches on the library's main reading table, a familiar figure appeared at the doorway of the basement workshop. It was Mark. He was drenched from the rain, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained. He looked older, thinner, and the arrogant confidence he once wore like a suit of armor was gone, leaving him looking frail and lost. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his eyes taking in the scene. The beautiful, restored oak furniture, the smell of linseed oil and wax, me, in my simple work apron, my hands covered in sawdust. He looked at my work, then at my face, and his composure finally broke. His shoulders slumped, and a sound, halfway between a sob and a gasp, escaped his lips. "Dad," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I lost everything. The business, it's bankrupt. The bank is taking the building. Jessica, she took the kids and went to her mother's." I put down my polishing rag and walked slowly towards him. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, no desire to say, "I told you so." All I felt was a deep, profound sorrow for the son I was looking at, for the pain and failure etched onto his face. He was my son, and he was hurting. "They're foreclosing on the house too," he continued, his voice barely audible over the drumming of the rain outside. "I messed up. I messed everything up. I thought I was so smart. My business degree, my modern ideas, I thought you were just an old man, stuck in the past. But you weren't. You were building something real, something that mattered. And I I tore it all down because I was arrogant. And because I was so desperate to prove that I was better than you. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and painful. I wanted to be my own man, he choked out. But I didn't know how. I thought being my own man meant erasing you, rejecting everything you stood for. I listened to Jessica. I listened to business gurus. I listened to everyone except the one person who actually knew what he was talking about. You. I drove by your stall the other day, he said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. It's beautiful. People love it. They love you. You built something new, from nothing, all over again, while I took everything you gave me and turned it into dust. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I'm so sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. I looked at my son, no longer a corporate shark but a broken man, and I saw the little boy who used to stand on a crate to reach my workbench. The boy I had loved, and the man I still loved, despite everything. I didn't have all the answers for him. I couldn't fix his marriage or his finances. I couldn't undo the damage he had done. But I could offer him the one thing a father should always have for his son. I stepped forward and pulled him into an embrace. He was stiff at first, surprised. Then he just collapsed against me, sobbing into my shoulder like a lost child. I held him, my hand patting his back, the same way I did when he was a boy and had fallen off his bike. It's all right, son, I murmured into his hair. It's all right. We'll figure it out. Figuring it out was a long, slow process. Mark stayed with me for a while, sleeping on the old couch in the living room. For the first week, he barely spoke, moving through the house like a ghost. I didn't push him. I just made him breakfast in the morning and left a plate out for him for dinner. One morning, he followed me out to my truck as I was leaving for the stall. Can I come with you? He asked, his voice hesitant. I can't just sit here anymore. All right, I said simply. When we got to the stall, I handed him a broom. You can start by sweeping up. He looked at the broom, then at me. For a second, I saw a flash of his old pride, a flicker of indignation. Then it was gone, replaced by a quiet resignation. He took the broom and started sweeping. He spent the entire day doing menial tasks, sweeping sawdust, organizing scraps of lumber, loading finished pieces into customers' cars. He didn't complain. He just worked. Leo, my apprentice, was wary of him at first. But Mark kept his head down and his mouth shut. It was hard for him. I knew it was. The whole town saw him. The former CEO of Harris Modern Design, now a laborer at his father's roadside shack. Some people whispered. Some stared. But the decent ones, the ones who had known me for years, just gave a quiet nod of respect. They saw a man paying his dues. Slowly, tentatively, I started giving him more to do. I had him sand a set of cutting boards. His technique was sloppy at first, impatient. With the grain, Mark, I said gently, taking a piece of sandpaper and showing him. Always with the grain. You can't fight the wood. You have to work with it. It was a lesson that applied to more than just carpentry. One day, his wife, Jessica, showed up at the stall. She stood by her expensive car, arms crossed, watching Mark struggle to carry a heavy slab of maple. She looked angry, embarrassed. She marched over to me. What is this, Daniel? She demanded. Is this your idea of a joke? Humiliating him? He's not humiliated, Jessica, I said calmly. He's working. He's learning. He's a businessman. He has a degree. He shouldn't be sweeping floors. That degree didn't stop him from losing everything, I replied, my voice even but firm. Maybe he needs to learn something that can't be taught in a classroom. Maybe he needs to learn the value of honest work, of starting from the bottom. She and Mark had a tense conversation by her car. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the anger in her posture and the exhaustion in his. In the end, she got back in her car and drove away alone. Mark watched her go, then came back to the workbench and picked up his sandpaper without a word. Weeks turned into months. A quiet routine formed. Mark was the first to arrive at the stall and the last to leave. The physical labor was changing him. The softness from his office life was gone. replaced by a lean strength. His hands, once smooth and manicured, were becoming calloused and capable. He was quieter, more observant. He started to ask questions, not about profit margins, but about technique. "Dad, why do you use a dovetail joint here instead of the box joint? How do you know when a blade is truly sharp?" I answered his questions patiently, showing him, letting him feel the wood, letting him make mistakes and learn from them. I saw glimpses of the boy he used to be, the one who was fascinated by how things fit together. The library project was finished, a resounding success, and the museum commissioned me to build a series of display cases. It was a big job for my little operation. "I need your help on this one, Mark," I told him one evening. "I need you to handle the drawings, the measurements, precise work." It was the first real responsibility I had given him. He worked on the plans for a week, late into the night at my kitchen table, just as Martha used to. His drawings were clean and accurate. He had a good mind for geometry and numbers. He was using his business school skills. But now, they were grounded in the reality of the material. The turning point came when we were working on a particularly tricky part of the display cases, a curved glass door set in a cherry frame. It required a difficult bent lamination. "I don't think I can do this," he said, frustration mounting as a piece splintered. "Yes, you can," I said. "Breathe. Feel the wood. Don't force it." We worked on it together, side by side. Our hands, one old and wrinkled, the other younger but learning, guided the thin strips of cherry around the form. When we finally clamped the last piece in place, a perfect, graceful curve, he looked at it, then at me. A slow, genuine smile, the first I'd seen in a year, spread across his face. It wasn't a smile of triumph or ambition. It was a smile of pure, quiet satisfaction. In that moment, I knew he was going to be okay. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was becoming a craftsman. A few weeks later, Jessica came back. This time, she didn't stay by the car. She walked right up to the workbench where Mark was carefully planing the edge of a board. She watched him for a long time. He was so focused. He didn't even notice her at first. When he finally looked up, he just stopped, the plane held in midair. "I brought the kids," she said softly. "They miss their dad." That weekend, Mark went to see his family. When he came back on Monday morning, there was a new lightness in his step. "We talked," he told me. "Really talked. It's a start." My story doesn't end with us rebuilding a big company. It ends much better than that. It ends here, at this dusty roadside stall. Leo is now a talented young carpenter in his own right, managing most of the day-to-day work. Mark found his place, not as a boss, but as a partner. He handles the designs, the client meetings, and the complex joinery, while I stick to the restoration work I love. We renamed the stall just last month. A new sign, hand-carved by the three of us, hangs above the door. It says Harris' son Leo. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, when the work is done and the sun is setting, the three of us will sit on a bench out front, drinking coffee. I look at Mark, his face calm, his hands strong, and I see a man who has finally found his way home. He didn't just lose a business. He lost his way, and in the sawdust and shavings of this humble place, he found himself again. He found that the legacy I wanted to give him wasn't a building or a brand, but a set of values: honesty, integrity, and respect for the work. He had to lose everything to finally understand what was worth keeping. And I had to lose my business to truly get my son back. It was a trade I would make again in a heartbeat. The celebration after the court's decision was a night I'll never forget. The entire town, it seemed, descended upon the farmer's market, bringing potluck dishes, stringing up lights, and setting up a makeshift stage for a local bluegrass band. The air was thick with the smell of grilled hot dogs and the sweet perfume of victory. Mark stood by my side, his arm around Jessica, his children chasing fireflies near the edge of the woods. He looked at me over the heads of the crowd, his eyes clear and steady. "We did it, Dad," he said. And the simple, We was worth more to me than any business ledger. The stall was safe. It was more than safe. It was a landmark, a testament to the fact that a community could stand up and declare what it valued. It was a perfect ending. Or so I thought. Life, I've learned, isn't a single story with a neat conclusion. It's a series of chapters, and the end of one is simply the quiet page before the next begins. The next 5 years were a period of calm, steady growth. Our little stall, now officially named Harris Sons Leo Woodcraft, became a beloved institution. Leo returned from woodworking school each summer, his mind buzzing with new techniques in wood preservation and joinery that he blended seamlessly with my traditional methods. He brought knowledge of epoxies that could stabilize rotting wood and computer-aided design programs that could model complex repairs before a single cut was made. Mark, meanwhile, had completed his own transformation. He was a master craftsman now, his work displaying a patience and precision that I knew came from a place of deep, hard-won humility. He was the face of the business, wonderful with customers, able to translate their vague desires into concrete, beautiful designs. Jessica handled all the finances with a librarian's meticulousness, making our small enterprise more profitable than I ever could have alone. As for me, I slowed down. I had to. The fire in my back had cooled to a constant, smoldering ache. I couldn't lift the heavy timbers anymore, or spend 10 hours standing at the bench. My role shifted. I became the mentor, the consultant, the keeper of the old knowledge. I would sit on my stool, a cup of coffee in hand, and watch my son and my apprentice work, their movements a familiar, comforting dance. I found a new kind of joy in it, the joy of a legacy not just secured, but thriving and evolving. I had everything a man could want. The beginning of the next chapter arrived on a brisk spring morning, in the form of my old friend, Robert Henderson from the Historical Society. He pulled up to the stall, not in his usual sedan, but in a dusty town utility truck. His face was grim. "Daniel, Mark," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "We have a problem. A big one. Get in, I need to show you something." We drove out to the edge of town, to the old Black Creek Gorge. Spanning it was the Miller's Crossing Bridge, a 120-foot covered bridge built in the 1920s. It was the town's most iconic landmark, the picture on the front of all the postcards. It was also, as we were about to see, in catastrophic trouble. A state inspector, doing a routine check, had condemned it. We stood at the barricaded entrance, the wood of the bridge groaning in the wind. A huge section of the roof had collapsed, and one of the main trusses, a massive lattice of timber, was visibly cracked and sagging. It looked like the tired spine of some ancient dying beast. "The state wants to tear it down," Robert said, his voice heavy. "They're proposing a 2-lane concrete and steel replacement, functional, cheap, and utterly soulless. It would change the entire character of this town forever. Can it be saved?" Mark asked, his craftsman's eye already tracing the lines of the damage. "The Historical Society commissioned an independent engineering report," Robert said, handing Mark a thick binder. "The bones are good. Mostly old-growth oak and pine. It can be restored, but it would be a monumental undertaking. It would require a team with an almost forgotten level of skill in timber framing. Combined with modern structural engineering, the town council is holding a hearing in a month to decide its fate." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Daniel, there's no one else in this state, maybe in the whole region, who knows old timber like you do. And Mark, you know how to manage a project. We want you to submit a proposal to restore it." The scale of it was terrifying. This wasn't a piece of furniture. It was a massive work of engineering and history. My first instinct was to say no. I was too old. We were too small. But then I looked at the bridge, at the elegant, simple strength of its design, and I felt a familiar stirring in my soul. This was the ultimate test of everything I believed in. "We'll need to see those engineering reports," Mark said, his voice all business. "And the original blueprints, if you have them." That night, the three of us, me, Mark, and Leo, who had just returned from his final year of school, spread the plans across the workbench at the stall. The original blueprints were beautiful, drawn by hand with an artist's care. The engineering report was a dense, terrifying document full of terms like load-bearing failure and structural decay. "The main truss is the challenge," Leo said, pointing with a pencil. "The rot is deep. We can't just patch it. We have to sister in new beams, but the weight would be immense. Maybe we could use a modern laminate for the new beams, for strength and weight reduction. A laminate in a historic bridge?" I grumbled, my traditionalist instincts flaring up. "Dad, it would be internal," Mark countered patiently. "Structurally essential, but invisible. We can clad it with period-accurate oak. It's the only way to ensure it lasts another 100 years. It's about respecting the design while using the best modern methods to guarantee its integrity." I looked at my son and my apprentice, their heads bent together under the single lamp, arguing passionately and respectfully about the soul of a beam. They were right. This project would require all of us. My old-world knowledge of how this would lived and breathed, Mark's skill in planning and management, and Leo's grasp of new technology that could make it all possible. "All right," I said, a smile touching my lips. "Let's drop our proposal." For the next 3 weeks, we worked relentlessly. We were a whirlwind of activity. I acted as the chief consultant, identifying the wood, diagnosing the decay, and sketching out the traditional joinery that would be needed. Mark was the architect in general, creating a masterful project plan, a step-by-step Bible of how we would dismantle, repair, and reassemble the bridge. He spent hours on the phone, sourcing period-accurate materials, and consulting with a structural engineer who specialized in historical timber. Leo was the technical wizard, using his computer to create a stunning 3-dimensional model of the bridge, showing exactly how the repairs would be integrated. He also researched and found a specialized epoxy, originally developed for restoring wooden ships, that could consolidate and strengthen the salvageable timbers. Our final proposal was a work of art in itself. It was a thick, spiral-bound book, filled with Mark's meticulous budget and timeline, Leo's detailed 3D renderings, and my hand-drawn sketches of the complex mortise and tenon joints that held the bridge together. It was a document born of 3 generations of craftsmanship, a perfect fusion of the past, present, and future. We submitted it to the town council with a sense of profound pride. Our sense of hope was short-lived. A week before the town hearing, the opposition emerged, and it had a familiar, odious face. A full-page ad appeared in the local paper. It showed a picture of the crumbling bridge, with the headline, "Don't let nostalgia cost you a fortune." It argued that a new, modern concrete bridge would be faster, cheaper, and safer. The ad was paid for by the Committee for a Fiscally Responsible Future. At the bottom, in small print, was the name of the committee's chairman, Arthur Vance, the CEO of Titan Corp. He hadn't forgiven us for the humiliation over the stall. This wasn't just business for him, it was revenge. Vance launched a slick, aggressive campaign. He put up billboards. He ran radio ads. He portrayed our restoration plan as a sentimental vanity project, and our small company as a group of amateurs unqualified for a project of this scale. He cleverly framed the debate as common sense versus nostalgia, fiscal responsibility versus wasteful spending. And his message, I had to admit, was beginning to find an audience in our practical, hard-working town. The battle for the stall had been about saving our family's soul. This was different. This was a battle for the town's identity, and we were once again standing in the path of a bulldozer, both literal and metaphorical. "He's using my own playbook against me," Mark said one night, staring at one of Vance's flyers with a grim expression. "All the same corporate tactics, spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt." He looked up at me. "But this time, I'm on the right side. And this time, I know how to fight back." The upcoming town hearing was no longer just a formality. It was going to be a showdown. Arthur Vance, with his corporate power and his thirst for revenge, against our small family, armed with nothing but our skills, our reputation, and a deep, abiding love for a crumbling old bridge. The week leading up to the hearing was the most intense of our lives. Arthur Vance's campaign escalated. His committee sent out mailers filled with misleading figures, inflating our projected costs and understating the long-term maintenance costs of a concrete bridge. He gave an interview on the local radio station, his voice oozing a false sincerity as he spoke about progress and the safety of our children. He was a master manipulator, and he was painting us as quaint but irresponsible dreamers. "We can't fight him on his terms," Mark said, pacing the floor of the stall. "We can't match his ad budget. We have to fight him on our terms. We fight with truth and with trust." This was Mark in his element, but a version I'd never seen before. The ruthless ambition had been tempered into a sharp, focused determination. The arrogance was replaced by a quiet confidence rooted not in a business degree, but in the sawdust under his fingernails. He organized our counter-offensive with the precision of a general. First, he and Jessica, who had become a formidable financial analyst, spent 2 days breaking down Vance's numbers. They created a simple, one-page fact sheet that they handed out at the grocery store and the post office. It showed, in ASIA, clear, undeniable terms, how Vance had manipulated the data. They included a section on the hidden costs of the concrete bridge, things like environmental impact studies, and the much shorter lifespan of concrete versus properly maintained old-growth timber. They weren't just defending our proposal. They were exposing his lies. Next, Leo took to social media, but not with angry arguments. He created a beautiful, poignant video. He interviewed dozens of townspeople, asking them for their memories of the Miller's Crossing Bridge. He spoke to grandparents who had their first kiss there, families who took their annual photos on it, artists who had painted it for decades. He intercut these heartfelt stories with his stunning 3D animations of the restoration process, showing the bridge coming back to life. The video ended with a simple shot of my gnarled hands resting on a piece of ancient oak, with the words, "Some things are worth saving." The video was shared thousands of times, far beyond the borders of our town. It reframed the debate entirely. This wasn't about money, it was about memory. My role was quieter. Mark asked me to host a series of open houses at the stall. He wanted people to see the work, to feel the wood, to understand the craft that Vance was so dismissively calling amateur. For 3 days, people filed through our small workshop. I didn't do the speech. I just worked. I took a piece of oak, similar to the timbers in the bridge, and began to cut a massive mortise and tenon joint, the kind that had held the bridge together for a century. People gathered around, mesmerized by the slow, deliberate process. They watched the shadings curl off my plane. They saw the precision required to get a perfect fit. They asked questions, and I answered them, explaining how the interlocking joints distributed weight and allowed the wood to breathe. I wasn't selling them a project. I was showing them a philosophy. I was reminding them that some things, built with care and integrity, were meant to last. The night of the town hearing, the high school auditorium was packed to the rafters. It felt like the whole town was holding its breath. Arthur Vance and his team of lawyers sat on one side, looking smug and confident in their expensive suits. Our family, along with Robert Henderson, sat on the other. We were not in suits. We were in our clean work clothes. We were here as craftsmen, not executives. Vance spoke first. He was slick and persuasive, using charts and Bach graphs to make his case for the efficiency and modernity of his concrete bridge. He called our plan a fiscally reckless fantasy, and us well-intentioned but unqualified carpenters playing at being engineers. He finished with a flourish. It's time for this town to look to the future, not be shackled to a decaying relic of the past. Then it was our turn. Robert Henderson spoke first, laying out the Historical Society's case for preservation. Then he called his expert witness. I'd like to call Mark Harris to the podium. Mark walked up to the podium, carrying nothing but a small, intricately joined block of wood. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of his neighbors, and he began to speak. His voice was steady, without a trace of the corporate jargon he once favored. Mr. Vance calls this bridge a relic, Mark began. He's right. It is a relic. It's a relic of a time when things were built to last. It's a relic of the men who put their hands on this timber, who cut these joints, who built something for their great-grandchildren to use. Mr. Vance talks about the future. I want to talk about it too. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. A future where the cheapest option is always the best option is a poor future indeed. A future where we tear down the beautiful things that tell our story, simply because it's easier than fixing them, is an empty future. This isn't just about a bridge. It's about who we are as a town. Do we value expedience over excellence? Do we value the temporary over the timeless? He then turned his attention directly to Vance. Mr. Vance calls my family amateurs. My father, he said, turning to look at me, has been working with wood for over 50 years. He has more knowledge in his hands than I will ever have in my head. My partner, Leo, just graduated at the top of his class from the best woodworking school in the country. And as for me, well, I'm an expert in Mr. Vance's way of thinking. I used to believe, as he does, that the bottom line was the only thing that mattered. I ran a business on that principle. I built things with cheap materials and slick marketing, and I ran that business straight into the ground. A shocked murmur went through the crowd. This was the first time Mark had ever spoken so publicly about his failure. I learned a hard lesson. He continued, his voice resonating with a powerful sincerity. I learned that a foundation of sawdust and glue will always crumble. True value, the kind that lasts, is built on integrity, honesty, and respect for the craft. That is the foundation we are proposing for this bridge. That is the foundation this town was built on. He finished by walking over to the council members' table. He placed the small block of wood he was carrying in front of the mayor. It was a perfect miniature timber frame joint. We aren't asking you to fund a fantasy, he said quietly. We're asking you to invest in yourselves, to invest in your own story. He walked back to his seat amidst a stunned silence, which was then broken by a single person clapping. It was old Frank. Then another person joined in, and another, until the entire auditorium was on its feet in a deafening wave of applause. Arthur Vance sat stunned, his confident smirk finally wiped from his face. He had sold them numbers, but my son had sold them their own heart. The council's vote was a mere formality. It was unanimous. The Miller's Crossing Bridge would be restored. The project was the hardest and most rewarding year of my life. It became a true community effort. The town's volunteer fire department helped us rig the block and tackle systems to lower the massive timbers. The high school shop class came on weekends to help sand and refinish the decking planks. The ladies of the church auxiliary kept our entire crew fed and caffeinated. Under Mark's brilliant management, the work proceeded with a beautiful, organized rhythm. Leo's technical skills saved us weeks of time, and his new methods for treating the wood ensured the bridge would be safe from rot and insects for generations. My own role was exactly what it should have been. I couldn't climb the scaffolding, but every morning, I was the first on site. Every piece of new timber, every joint, every repair had to pass my inspection. I was the guardian of the bridge's history, ensuring that every detail was true to the original builder's intent. I was teaching, mentoring, and finally, letting go, trusting the strong hands and bright minds of the next generation. The grand reopening of the Miller's Crossing Bridge was on a perfect sunny day in October. A year after the town meeting. The entire town was there. The bridge was magnificent, a proud, strong sentinel spanning the gorge, its new timbers glowing warmly in the autumn light. It was the same bridge, but it was stronger. Its story now enriched by the chapter of its own salvation. The mayor asked me to say a few words and to cut the ceremonial ribbon. I stood at the entrance to the bridge, leaning on my cane, with Mark on one side and Leo on the other. I looked out at the sea of friendly faces, and my grandchildren holding a celebratory banner, at Jessica beaming with pride. A long time ago, I began, my voice a little shaky. I thought my legacy was a building with my name on it. Then, I thought it might be a small stall where I did honest work, but I was wrong. I looked at the bridge, then at my son. A legacy isn't something you build for yourself. It's what you build for others. It's the strength and the beauty you leave behind that helps connect one generation to the next. I took the oversized scissors, and with Mark and Leo steadying my hands, I cut the bright red ribbon. As the crowd surged forward, the first people to walk across the restored bridge, Mark leaned over to me. "We did it, Dad," he whispered again. But this time, I knew the "we" didn't just mean our family. It meant all of us. The whole town. I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting on a bench, watching the children run back and forth across the bridge, their laughter echoing off the old oak timbers. My work was done. The story I'd started telling in wood all those years ago had found its perfect, timeless ending.